It is the skeleton of a skyscraper, the skin of a fighter jet, and the can that holds your favorite beer. It's aluminum, the lightweight metal that underpins modern life, forged in the industrial heartlands of North America. But in the spring of 2025, a presidential decree turned this vital commodity into the front line of a brutal trade war. A 50% tariff, meant as a shield for American workers, quickly backfired, igniting a crisis that threatened to lay off 100,000 of them. How did a plan to protect an industry push it to the brink of collapse? For half a century, the North American aluminum and steel industries were not competitors. They were an integrated organism. This wasn't just a trading relationship, it was a strategic pact built on geography and physics. Canada, with its vast reserves of hydroelectric power in places like Quebec, could produce primary aluminum, an incredibly energy-intensive process, at a cost American smelters simply couldn't match. This clean, cheap, and reliable Canadian metal flowed south, feeding the insatiable appetite of American manufacturing. From the body panels of Ford trucks in Michigan to the fuselage of Boeing jets in Washington, Canadian aluminum was a foundational component of American industrial might. It was a perfectly symbiotic relationship, a model of continental efficiency that powered shared prosperity. The first cracks in this foundation appeared under the banner of national security. Citing Section 232 of a 1962 trade law, the Trump administration began to wield tariffs as a tool to protect domestic producers. On March 12, 2025, an initial 25% tariff was imposed on most imported steel and aluminum, hitting even its closest allies, Canada and Mexico. For the U.S. administration, this was a necessary shield to revive American smelters. For Canada, it was an incomprehensible betrayal. To label Canadian aluminum, a metal supplied by a key NATO and NORAD partner, a threat to American national security, was seen as not just an economic attack, but a deep political insult. This initial volley of tariffs created immediate chaos, disrupting supply chains and injecting a toxic level of uncertainty into the market. It forced American companies who had relied on the stability of the relationship for decades to suddenly view their northern neighbor not as a partner, but as a source of political risk. Trust, the bedrock of the entire system, began to corrode, setting the stage for a far more devastating confrontation. The fragile truce shattered in late May 2025. Dissatisfied with the results of the initial 25% tariff, the Trump administration chose not to de-escalate, but to double down with breathtaking force. Invoking the same Section 232 national security powers, the White House announced it was increasing the tariff on imported aluminum and steel to a punishing 50%, effective June 4th. This was no longer a policy shield. It was a battering ram designed to force a complete and total capitulation from global suppliers and compel American companies to buy American, no matter the cost. The stated logic remained the same: to protect the few remaining U.S. smelters from what it deemed unfair foreign competition, thereby ensuring America's ability to produce its own critical materials for defense. The administration pointed to a small number of upstream producers, like Century Aluminum and Metalco, who stood to benefit from the artificially inflated domestic prices. In this view, any pain felt by the rest of the economy was a necessary price to pay for resurrecting a core American industry. The market reaction was instantaneous and brutal, a clear vote of no confidence in the policy. While the stocks of a few domestic smelters saw a brief uptick, the giants of American manufacturing, the very companies that employ millions of Americans, went into a tailspin. Shares of Ford, General Motors, Boeing, and even can maker Ball Corporation all fell between 2% and 5% on the day of the announcement. These companies don't buy ingots of raw aluminum. They buy millions of tons of it. And a 50% price hike on a core input material is a direct shot to their financial heart. The policy created an immediate and perverse distortion in the market. As reported by Reuters, the Midwest aluminum premium, a key benchmark for the cost of the metal in the U.S., surged by a record 12%, or 24 cents per pound. This meant American manufacturers were suddenly forced to pay drastically more for a critical material than their global competitors. The deep irony was that the policy did little to address the fundamental structural reason for the decline of U.S. aluminum smelting: energy costs. The process is incredibly electricity intensive, and the average industrial electricity price in the U.S. was already more than double that of hydro-rich Quebec. The tariffs didn't make American smelters more efficient. They simply made life impossible for every American industry that uses aluminum. As industry groups like the Beer Institute and the Alliance for Automotive Innovation immediately warned, and as analysts cited by Axios pointed out, for every single job the tariff might save in a smelter, it threatened to destroy as many as 16 downstream jobs in manufacturing, fabrication, and construction. Across the border, the reaction was a mixture of fury and sorrow. For Canada, the 50% tariff was not just an economic attack, it was the final, definitive shredding of a century-old trust. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government immediately condemned the move as an illegal and unjustifiable abuse of U.S. law. Ottawa wasted no time in responding, initiating a formal dispute settlement case at the World Trade Organization, logged as DS-635, and publicly vowing to impose dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs if the U.S. did not reverse course. The economic stakes were immense. Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, issued a stark warning. Given the deep integration of the North American auto and aerospace industries, a 50% tariff would be catastrophic, creating chaos on both sides of the border. Canadian government forecasts painted a grim picture. The initial impact could vaporize 23,000 jobs in the Canadian steel sector and another 9,500 in aluminum within weeks, with far more at risk as the disruption rippled through the economy. What made the policy so infuriating for Canadians was its deep economic irrationality. The tariffs were presented as a way to level the playing field, but they ignored the fundamental physics of aluminum production. Canada's competitive advantage wasn't based on unfair subsidies or labor practices. It was based on geography and massive long-term investments in clean, renewable hydroelectric power. While the average U.S. industrial electricity price was climbing towards 8.21 cents per kilowatt hour, smelters in Quebec were paying as little as 2.48 cents. No tariff could erase this colossal structural advantage. Instead of making U.S. smelters competitive, the policy simply punished American companies for sourcing their aluminum from the most logical, efficient, and reliable partner they had. It was a move that seemed designed not to help America, but purely to punish Canada. The international community sided with Ottawa. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea all issued sharp rebukes, threatening their own retaliatory measures and expressing fears that the U.S. was triggering a global scrap war over resources. Canada was no longer just a victim. It was now the reluctant front line of a global coalition against American protectionism. The 50% tariff plunged the entire North American industrial sector into a state of paralysis. It created an impossible civil war within American industry itself. A handful of upstream smelters cheered the high prices, while the vastly larger downstream sector, the companies that buy aluminum to make cars, planes, boats, beer cans, and building materials, faced ruin. The White House was now trapped. To save a few thousand jobs in one sector, it was actively destroying tens of thousands of jobs in another. Backing down would mean admitting the policy was a catastrophic failure and angering the very base it was designed to please. For American manufacturers, the choice was equally grim: absorb the massive cost increase and watch their profits evaporate, or pass the cost onto consumers, lose market share to foreign competitors, and ultimately lay off workers. For Canada, the path forward was treacherous. Imposing retaliation would hurt its own consumers and escalate a trade war it couldn't win, but doing nothing was politically impossible. The integrated continental economy, once a source of strength, had become a cage from which neither side could easily escape. In the industrial heartland of Canada, the impact of the tariffs was felt not as an economic theory, but as a direct assault on livelihoods. Consider a family-owned company in Windsor, Ontario, that has spent 40 years manufacturing specialized aluminum components for the big three automakers in Detroit, just across the river. Their entire business model is built on the promise of the integrated North American auto sector. The 50% tariff instantly made their products uncompetitive. An American automaker, now forced to pay a massive tax on those Canadian parts, would immediately seek alternatives, either from a less efficient U.S. supplier or by shifting production of that component altogether. The Canadian government's forecast of 9,500 lost jobs in the aluminum sector and 23,000 in steel wasn't just a number. It represented thousands of real families in communities like Windsor, Hamilton, and Sault Ste. Marie facing the terrifying prospect of unemployment. The Union Unifor, representing these workers, was forced into a desperate battle, lobbying not just Ottawa, but also directly with U.S. lawmakers to explain the insanity of a policy that pitted workers against each other. The ultimate frustration for Canada was the sheer injustice. Their aluminum industry wasn't just a competitor, it was a cleaner, more efficient partner. By punishing Canada, the U.S. was not only damaging its closest ally, but also incentivizing the use of aluminum from other parts of the world that might have a much larger carbon footprint. The tariffs created a crisis of confidence that went beyond economics, leaving a deep sense of betrayal and forcing Canadian industries to question the viability of a future so closely tied to their unpredictable neighbor. Back in the United States, the policy backfired with stunning speed and severity. The very companies the tariffs were meant to protect became some of their biggest victims. Alcoa, one of America's most iconic aluminum producers, issued a dire warning. While its upstream smelting operations might see a short-term benefit, the company's vast downstream businesses, which fabricate finished aluminum products, would be crushed by the high metal prices. Their analysis was horrifying. The policy threatened to destroy up to 20,000 of their own and other direct manufacturing jobs and a further 80,000 jobs in related industries like transportation and construction. The total potential job loss, over 100,000 American workers, all to protect an industry segment that employed a fraction of that number. The pain was felt across the entire economy. As reported by Reuters, new orders for core capital goods, a key indicator of business investment, fell by 0.7% in June as companies slammed the brakes on expansion plans amid the uncertainty and soaring costs. The construction industry faced crippling price hikes for aluminum siding and steel beams. The beverage industry saw the cost of beer and soda cans skyrocket. And the auto and aerospace giants, the crown jewels of American manufacturing, were now at a significant competitive disadvantage against their European and Asian rivals. The policy had failed to create an American manufacturing renaissance. Instead, it had wrapped the entire U.S. economy in expensive, self-imposed red tape. And so, North America stands at a crossroads it never anticipated. A trade policy born from a desire to protect American jobs has resulted in threatening over 100,000 of them, creating a civil war within its own industry. It has punished its most reliable and efficient partner, Canada, and has made American manufacturing less competitive on the world stage. The integrated economic architecture that defined a continent has been fractured, not by foreign competition, but by a self-inflicted wound. The pursuit of economic nationalism has created a crisis of shared economic pain. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both sides lose trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.